Okay, can you all see that little calculator thingy?
We can.
Yes, hooray, hooray.
Yes.
Okay. Now I've got to try and gather my thoughts and remember what I was going to say. So most of us we've all used ordinary four-function calculators or slightly more advanced scientific calculators and so on. And one of the challenges with those is that when you want to do complex operations like 2 plus 5 times 9 times plus 7 with parentheses around, it can get a little bit complex, a little bit difficult to do those calculations, and you may often, can you see my mouse cursor?
Yes.
Yeah. Often you have to resort to sticking stuff away into memory locations and recalling them and so on. Of course, this calculator does not have a parenthesis key simply because it doesn't need parentheses. So with reverse Polish notation, it sounds Polish, it sounds very reverse, and initially, until you sort of get the idea about it, it seems quite perverse as well. But it's actually very powerful once you get the idea. And in fact, the fundamental concept is what the vast majority of computers these days use within their internal architecture to keep things humming along. So what we have here in the reverse Polish calculator is a series of memory locations like here, which are called a stack. So each one of those can contain a number. And it has the attribute that if you put a number in there and hit enter, it gets pushed up the stack, pushed up the stack, pushed up the stack. Can you see that? If I now hit the plus key, it will add together that number there and that number there. 12, plus key again, 18, plus key again, 24. And the stack has cleared itself down. If I went one further, I'll do this lots and lots and lots of times, then there's this invisible register up here that stores the last one. So I can keep on, I've got an endless supply of that number. So that's the beginning of it. Now I'm just going to clear everything. So I'm clear there. Something like, if I've got, say, 2 plus 3 times 4 plus 5, I would do 2, enter, 3 plus, 4, enter, 5 plus, and times. So I've done that without any need for parentheses. Now, I don't know if that messes with your brain or not. Initially, it probably does. When you get used to it, you find that if you've got a fairly long, complex engineering calculation to do, it almost doesn't matter what order you put the numbers in, as long as you reasonably logically, like I did, put the numbers in the order you're going to use them. I mean, I could have actually gone 2 plus 3 plus 5 plus 6, enter. Whoops, hang on, mistake, that was a mistake, sorry, do it again. 2, enter, 3, enter. What's going on? 2, enter, 3, enter. There's possibly a little bug in this program. 5, enter, 6, plus. No, can't do that. Sorry.
It's a swap.
I'll take that back. There is a swap. Okay, I can do a swap. I can then do a drop, a pop, and I've lost it. I've lost it somehow. No, forget that. You can't do a roll on this this calculator, which is the missing thing. Is John here with me? John, can't pronounce his surname. John. No. Okay. So I'm not doing this very well, am I? apart from obviously things like square roots and stuff, which is not important. So that's the basic idea, if you like. You've got some instructions here or keys here for manipulating stuff on the stack, which can vary with the richness of the particular calculator you've gone and bought. The one that most of us use are made by Hewlett Packard. I don't actually know if anyone else makes reverse Polish calculators. Anyone know other than Hewlett Packard? These came out first.
There are a number.
I beg pardon?
There are a number of manufacturers that make reverse Polish calculators.
Are there? Oh, okay. Actually, you mention it. Yes, I remember we had one at work with made by National Semiconductor. It was a little thing. It only had 3 registers on the stack rather than 4, but which echoed the very first one made by Hewlett Packard in 1968, which was a big desktop machine, and I think it was called the 9100A. Why they put A's on first release products, I have no idea, but they call it 9100A.
There was a one by Frieden which had 4 stacks on it, which was plus minus, and then they came out with one which magically had square root on it.
Oh yeah, well that's right. I remember the first time as an engineer, you don't need to do square roots, quite certainly electronics engineers. And my very first calculator before this was a little one by Sharp, which I bought in Singapore for quite a lot of money at the time. And my fingers were trained to whiz through rapidly a sequence of keys and do a Newton-Raphson approximation to the square root. I could do it with no more than about 20 keystrokes. So it was certainly lovely to finally wind up with a square root key on my calculator.
A slight variation, Texas Instruments put out one that included the hexadecimal numbers, so you could do hexadecimal calculations, which was very handy if you were looking at computer dumps.
Yes, and some of the Hewlett Packard ones have that. I think the one I own at the moment has got hexadecimal on it, so binary and certainly an octal as well. Of course, Texas Instruments in some ways were the great rival to Hewlett Packard, because their calculators were stubbornly algebraic, meaning using parentheses rather than reverse a stack. I distinctly remember one time I was doing a project up at Port Hedland for Mount Newman Mining, and a young fellow, I think it might be Terry that I'm still vaguely in contact with. He was a Texas Instrument calculator buff, and I was a Hewlett Packard calculator buff, and we'd sit in the single men's quarters and have competitions who could solve these big, long, stupid equations as the fastest. And I'm too modest to say who won outright, of course, because it was just a superior Hewlett Packard calculator that did the trick. Which incidentally echoed what I was doing with a school friend many years before, when we'd stay after school. We were uber geeks. We'd stay after school and have races on our slide rules, so you could solve these great big long calculations the fastest.
The HP 45 went into space in the early years of the International Space Station.
Yes, it did. And I never owned an HP 45. My first exposure to it started in 1968, not long after the 9100A had come out. I was working and living in Perth at the time, and Hewlett Packard held a little trade show at the Florid Hotel. Still remember that. And I went along, and here was this machine sitting on the desk there, which
HP 45.
Sorry?
HP 45 in front of you.
Oh, that was years later. But the thing sitting on the desk in 1968 was the big desktop machine called an HP 9100A. It was built without any integrated circuits at all, so it was all transistors and resistors and stuff. And it was a prodigious undertaking to build this thing. And it had a magnetic card reader. And being the young geek, I sat down at this, and one of the guys sort of said, well, here's what it does. So I sat there, played with it for 2 hours, and had the thing sort of sitting up and begging and almost playing, well, not literally, but metaphorically playing tunes and doing my bidding. It was all good fun.
Clive was just holding up a 45 to the screen.
I'm sorry?
Clive was just holding a 45 up to the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Oh, you still got an HP 45, Clive. Oh, good for you. My HP 35 died the death ages ago, so now I have a this one, HP, was it 33S, and it's not a patch really on the 35. I still miss my HP 35. But as I said, I cut my teeth on the 9100, and because I in those days to be able to do that was sort of the uber geek thing. Hewlett Packard actually offered me a job in Sydney to go to Sydney and be their computer guru, which I declined. So it would have been a very different career path if I had accepted that. Sorry?
I'm showing you a 25 right now, which I haven't turned on for about 15 years, probably.
Sorry, it's hard to see people's pictures while I've got my thing on the screen there. Somebody holding this hand up there. No.
Speak, Cedric.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring up a, now where's that hand?
Oh, yes, Cedric.
Yeah.
That's what's that, a 25?
It's a 25.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
It hasn't had a working battery for decades, but the first one I saw was a 35 when our Pico mines in Tennant Creek, the survey department, got a 25 in 1970. And as you said, they cost a bit of money at that stage. So,
yes.
a month or two's wages.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll mute myself now.
Well, the first one I owned was a 35, which I bought secondhand off my friend and mentor in Perth, who had actually become, I think by that stage, the state manager for Hewlett Packard. And he had bought one on his Hewlett Packard discount, and then he decided to upgrade or something and sold me his HP 35. If I recall correctly, I paid $350 for it secondhand.
What was the model that Dennis Fryer was holding up there?
What's that one, Dennis? I think you're muted. You're muted.
Microphone's not working.
Can't unmute him remotely.
I've got him on spotlight so we can see the calculator anyway.
Right, yeah. So it's good to see that. Dennis, we can't hear you. You're talking, but we can't hear you. No.
No.
Try that. Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Yes?
Much
Yep.
better.
Oh, good. This is a National Semiconductor 4640.
Aha.
It's a 4-stack machine. I bought it second hand. I was thinking in the 80s. Can't really remember, but it hasn't been working for about 30 years. It conked out one day and I just couldn't revive it. But it was a beautiful machine.
Yeah.
And yeah, I used it quite a lot.
So your occupation, Dennis, is sort of something in the
Oh,
engineering
at that time I was in electronics and I was doing a postal course with RMIT in electronics, and yeah, so I bought this to help me along.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
Oh, well, my HP 35 was used for, I'm going to say decades in my work. It was absolutely central. I could almost put my hand on my stick here somewhere, but I won't now to wave it around. I sort of landed my slide rule with a little 4-function calculator and then moved on to the HP 35. But also in between, around about the early 70s, we got a big project with my company for Mount Newman mining, and it was used a microprocessor. It was the first microprocessor project I had done, and it involved an awful lot of serious calculations, floating point calculations. Now, the process in those days of testing some software on a microprocessor was long and arduous. It was sort of a 2-hour cycle time to edit and reassemble a program and put it into the board and test it out. So what I did is I tested my algorithms using an HP 65 programmable pocket calculator, which had a little magnetic card reader in it to store programs. Affected the algorithms in that. And then for the target microprocessor, I wrote a floating point arithmetic package that emulated the HP 65, close enough to sort of basically I could just hand code the individual keystrokes as macro calls into the microprocessor, and it worked pretty much straight off. So I was debugging on an HP 65 and then feeding it into a microprocessor. That was
of course, remember before you could afford a slide rule, we used to use printed tables of logarithms and write them all out by hand.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say I could afford a slide rule from high school days on. But yes, certainly used the logarithms and stuff as well.
George?
You're muted, George. You're muted.
My apologies for that. David, you must be aware that there are myriads of HP emulators which work very well under Windows. How come you're using some generic calculator rather than a HP emulator?
For the demo? Oh, look, very simple. Good question. Actually, an excellent question, of course. And I have what hasn't disappeared off my desktop is my HP 42 emulator, but it's actually got so many more buttons. It's less suitable for demonstrating the basic principles than this little one I found online, which incidentally runs online. And if you like, I will.
No, that's okay. I was just curious. You mentioned HP in the mail app. I used a HP 35 for years and years. Yeah.
That's a fair enough.
I was keen on the reverse Polish notation. It saves keystrokes.
Trying to get this Windows hidden behind the panel. I'll post the link to that calculator on comments.
Can you give us the name of any you know, George?
Oh, not offhand.
Okay.
I had a 35. I also briefly had while I was working, I think a 48. There are emulators there. If you go to just put in the search engine, HP calculator emulators, and you will get pages. I mean, literally pages. HP, we've got a whole series of emulators you can load.
Yeah. And they're powerful. I have one in my phone as well, which is called Real Calc.
Yes. So have I.
That certainly comes from, and that's very good. And it shows the stack as well. That's the other thing about the HP 42 emulator. It doesn't show the full stack, whereas this little program here does. So I spent a bit of time yesterday finding that. Right now, I can't even find the pop-up window to post the link.
Maynard's got a question for you, David.
I just thought I'd show you a 15C. Now, I've had
yes.
this 15C for about 30 years, and it's on its 4th set of batteries, and it's still going very well. It's my favorite device.
Yeah, excellent.
Always on my desk.
Yeah, my partner Keith had one of those. He probably still has it on his desk.
But I would like, if you can allow me to do so, is to actually share an image with you from 1981.
Yep.
That be possible?
Yeah, go for it. I've just posted a link to that
Okay.
little simple one on the
If
chat.
you can see it. Can you see the?
Yep.
what I'm
Yep.
sharing?
Yep.
Okay, this is actually from 1981 in WA. I was asked by the Education Department of WA to make a scientific calculator for blind students. And I used an HP 41. In fact, the HP 41 is the one I have here that was used for
the very one.
And if I click on this, hopefully it'll do it.
Enter 5 plus equals 6, 5 plus equals 11.
That is what the students got.
Yeah, excellent.
Using a Votrax output.
Using a what, Clive?
Votrax, or the sound, you know, very famous original speech synthesis.
Text to speech?
Yeah, text to speech. Votrax was the original.
Right.
Anyway, there you go. I'll remove that now.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. So it's good to see that several people here have been exposed to RPN. What's happened? Oh. I'm getting all befuddled with everything here. Sorry, I turned my camera off accidentally. I think you're wanted, Peter. Okay, any other comments there? I'm sorry, my little sort of how it works demo wasn't terribly crash hot, but yeah.
For those of us who used a reverse Polish notation camera back in the I don't know, 80s, let's say, it would take a bit of, and having used one since, it would take a bit of polishing up to get the technique anywhere near usable again after all this time.
I've still got the calculators I was born with.
Very good, John.
I disagree with all that. That if before we had electronic calculators, we had these mechanical machines, they all worked that way. I'd never heard of reverse Polish till HP told me about it. Well, that's what I was brought up with, and I still don't use any other calculator.
Of course, reverse Polish notation is just a subset of a stack architecture, which the old Burroughs 6700 MCP was brilliant at using.
Yeah, I think it was Burroughs who introduced stack architecture into normal computers.
Or you programmed in Forth.
In
Forth.
Well, I was going to mention Forth, but we're sort of running out of time now. But yes, Forth was a programming language that came into the fore, I guess, I'm going to guess in the late 70s. I got quite wrapped up with it in the 80s for a while. And it has a stack which is effectively unlimited in depth, not just for locations.
It actually had two stacks, one for your parameters and one for your links.
For your subroutine returns, something, yeah. Well, they don't call them subroutines, but what they call them?
Functions.
Of course, the Burroughs language was Algol as the native language. So it didn't even have an assembler. Algol was the low-level language.
Right, yeah. The thing about most of the, well, all, I'm going to go out on a limb and say virtually all programming languages use a stack architecture internally, one way or the other, because the most efficient way of compiling a long arithmetic equation is using reverse Polish notation. Stick a number on the stack, stick a number on the stack, add the two together, and there you go.
In fact, one of the advantages Forth had was that it was a single pass compiler because it was already in reverse Polish, which meant it was used on satellites and things, Pioneer satellites, things like that, way out.
And apparently the boot ROM in Apple computers is written in Forth. Is that right?
Yep. Well, it was anyway. I don't know if it is.
Yeah. Of course, its strength is also its worst enemy, because in Forth, when you I have actually started, I shall say, writing a Forth system. You only have to write a very small number of functions in assembler. The basic sort of get the number, add the number, print the number, that sort of stuff. And once you've done that, you define the rest of Forth using Forth itself.
Exactly.
And sorry?
Yeah, you're right.
So therein lies the danger that everyone who comes along to use Forth for a particular application is effectively going to create their own language that suits that application, which is very powerful, but it's total murder for any poor mug that comes along later and tries to maintain that program, especially as the language is insanely cryptic as well. So, but it's certainly an interesting concept.
Yeah, for many years I was the Australian agent for LMI Forth, which were.
Oh right, okay.
And I sold quite a bit to Telstra things. Their original answering machines and all that sort of thing that you could buy were all actually programmed in Forth.
Right. Well, Clive, you just volunteered to do a presentation on Forth sometime in the near future.
Margaret.
That'll learn you.
I can do it.
Okay, guys. Well, look, it's 1934, so we shall run into the time to end this. I'm going to hand back the gavel to Peter Bacon briefly as Master of Ceremonies, and I'm going to go and get my notes for the AGM.
I think Bert Alizich is going to speak first. I'm just looking to see if he's joined us yet, Peter.
He has, yes.
Good. Okay, fire away, Bert.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, all. I was put on iHelp tonight, a little bit short, but anyway, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about some of the experiences we have. One of the things we do quite often seem to have are members who require fairly extensive help. They probably take up, say, 20% of our time, and there's only a few of those would be in that 20%. So, you know, they take a lot of time, but they need it, and they're great people. I was actually telling Harry about one of them today. I think we've just about all helped him, but his hearing's going, his eyesight's going, and his memory's going. So he's got a few issues. He's a very, very great guy. I really enjoy going to see him and help him. He's 97. He's going to be 98 in about 10 days' time. He keeps telling me he's not sure he's going to quite make 98, but he seems all right, apart from those 3 other issues. Anyway, he one of the troubles is that he's been using Windows 10 on his computer, and I don't know why. It must be that he's the hardware that he's got on his computer is sufficient that Microsoft have decided that he could do with an upgrade to Windows 11 without asking him or telling him or anything. Suddenly his computer's changed. Now, for someone in his condition, it was, it's just totally chaotic. He's trying to come to grips with this whole new system that Windows 11 is. Anyway, so we're trying to work through that. I spend a lot of time going to see him. He doesn't live very far from me. And because he can't hear very well, it's very hard to talk to him on the phone. And also, if you're trying to get him to do something and using something like Quick Assist or TeamViewer, he really can't handle it now. He used to be able to, but he's got to a stage now where it's difficult. So I have to go and see him actually and talk to him face to face. Gets along very well. He's amazingly alert for someone that old, and he's really doing quite well. But anyway, so we're trying at the moment to be able for him to collect all his old photos, so that his children, he's got a son and a daughter, plus their family, who he wants to leave all these old photos that he's got. His background is from Holland. He's probably been in Australia, I think, at least about 40 years. So it was probably maybe even longer, but his English is perfect, but he's also very fluent in Dutch, and he misses a lot of things about his homeland. So one of the things that he likes doing is there's a program from Holland that he likes to watch, but he keeps forgetting where it is. And I've tried to put it on his computer so he can get access to it readily. But anyway, so he gets it most of the time. But he does forget things. So he needs a lot of help. This time I had to go and help him. He lost his connection with his emails. I'm not sure why. I think it's Google decided that with their extra security now that he's got to re-put in his password, which he had totally forgotten, obviously. So anyway, with Dave Simpson's help, he looked up and we got him to put in a new, set up a new password, and now he's set up with that new password. So he's getting his emails, which he was very relieved about. Plus, with a bit of help from some of our other members, I was able to get a program for him that he can look up all his photos and just have his photos and go through them to try and sort them out. So that's just a rough idea of one particular member. We have other members that we must probably hear from them 3 or 4 times a month at least, and there's probably 5 or 6 of those. Otherwise, most of the time we're helping people generally with fairly straightforward problems, but they vary, and so our problems can go from very simple problems to highly complex ones that are way out of my league. But we generally get great support from other members to help out. So yeah, that'll give you a bit of an understanding of some of the work we do. So I'll might throw it back to Harry, who's going to talk a bit about the some of the issues we're just having now. And so unless you've got a question for me personally, I'll pass it over to Harry. Okay.
Any questions for Bert? I'll get on to current business that Bert mentioned in a moment. I'll just say that I spent quite a time today with a member. I was trying to help with her printer. And I think supporting printers is about my unfavorite thing, because you can't see the thing and the printer interfaces are all so different. This was a middle-aged Hewlett Packard printer that had been given to the member by her father and set up. And anyway, long story short, I became convinced that if the printer had any life in it at all, she would first have to buy it 2 new cartridges. It's one of those annoying printers with 1 3-color cartridge, 1 black cartridge. And I think it's sinful that they do this. We know their business model, don't we? Sell the printer at a rock bottom price and then charge you the earth for the ink. Yeah. Making you buy 3 full tanks when only one of them is empty seems to me should be actionable, but there you go. Several of the printers we looked, but then I just came to the conclusion she was best off buying a new printer rather than possibly wasting her money buying 2 cartridges for half the price of a new printer just to prove herself it didn't work. Anyway, that's just by the by. Please don't bring too many printer problems to us. No, what the little bit of history I wanted to earlier in the meeting, you were delving rather deeply into the history of one aspect of computing. I want to bring you a little bit closer to the recent history, which is when we changed our email system, mainly for the year 2014, into the first of the two Microsoft hosted systems, which we refer to as Outlook.com, because that was by then Microsoft's leading domain name for the service. It in fact had purchased the Hotmail service some years previously. So during 2014, members, all the members who were enrolled in the program at all, had an account with Microsoft in the Outlook.com system. Now, when our control over that was removed, those accounts were grandfathered. That's to say, they were left with the members as personal accounts. So MelbPC completely lost sight of those. But of course, they were using the same email address as the member had always had and still had in the new Office 365 system. Now, I never knew how many members retained those accounts. We tried to persuade members to change the email address, which you can do. You can still do it, I think. But it's become clear in recent weeks that an awful lot of members, A, still retain those accounts, B, haven't, I mean, what's clear is they're retaining an account with the same email address. Okay, so when we migrated the mail, we, not I personally, needless to say, but set up a system, courtesy partly of a tool provided by Google, I think, to migrate your email to the new Google system, didn't we? So with a certain amount of catching up and so on, members' data arrived at the new system, and it didn't really matter what was left in the Microsoft system because they were using the new one with their data. Now, the other major repository of membership data in the Microsoft system is the OneDrive. Major is a slightly awkward term here because I think about 30 of our members were using 90% of the storage that we actually used in Microsoft. It's a little bit like the inequalities of income across the planet, but in a slightly different way. We were using 3.4 terabytes total data, and I think, let's say 30 members were using 3 terabytes out of 1,200 accounts, right? So there are interesting facts about scale here. But the reason I mentioned the Outlook.com accounts is that when we're in a process, which I can reveal to present company, of archiving those OneDrives, we're not simply going to delete the accounts complete with data unless we're 100% sure the member has really finished with them. So for starters, we had a bit over half the members who never told us they'd finished with them, so they've been archived. In the course of that, Philip Lynch, who's been doing the heavy lifting, reckons anything up to 90% of those members had the 2 accounts still. In other words, there was still a valid Microsoft account using their MelbPC email address. So we're now even rather nervous about the members who've cheerfully told us they've finished with their OneDrive, to be absolutely sure they know which one they were looking at. We tried to explain how to check. Now, I'm sure that all present company are perfectly clear about this, so I'll be very happy to answer any questions you may have. But those members who are not as fully engaged with these things as are members who attend monthly meetings, not to mention AGMs, may possibly include some who have, unbeknown to them, been saving data in their Office 365 OneDrive. Over the next few weeks, we may well have evidence about that. A final footnote on that one is there's a rather I can't remember if I mentioned this to you guys before, but as we've been entering the world of Google, something to me quite surprising has emerged, namely that a lot of members somehow or other had Gmail accounts using their MelbPC email address. Now that has to be nothing to do with MelbPC, right? And those accounts have never received email, unlike those Microsoft accounts, which received it for 1 year. And that's a curious, it's a historical curiosity, which has also caused quite a lot of confusion. I think the main offender here, well, it's certainly an offender when a member was setting up their new MelbPC Google Workspace account in a client like Microsoft Outlook. I think Outlook is mainly emerged with Outlook. I'm not sure about Thunderbird. Because there's a point there when you're setting it up that Outlook handballs the process to Google. And as far as I can tell from some experience, the way that is done doesn't always enable, in this case, the user to choose which of the Google accounts it is when there are two of them with the same email address. All I can say is that whenever I've come across that problem, it's been solved by getting rid of the personal Gmail account with the MelbPC email address, of which in every case I've dealt with so far, the member was blissfully unaware. So within the last few months, I'm very confident to say that there have been members with 4 valid accounts using the same email address, 2 with Google and 2 with Microsoft. So unfortunately, that's not quite the form of opulence that is completely free of confusion. We've had confusion on both sides of that particular river. I'll pause there anyway, and then we can go over to our usual general discussion. Anybody want to raise any issues at all in the context of what I just said?
Harry, I was just wondering, just thinking, no wonder I was confused. God, it's unbelievable.
It's confusing enough in its own right. And the means of dealing with it are very challenging, Gary. I think we've learned how to deal with getting rid of the redundant Google account. I haven't usually had the same, the issue about the redundant Microsoft account is not that it's caused a problem about a member's email or work. It's just an unknown when we come to the OneDrive. For what it's worth, look, I think everybody in this meeting almost certainly will know this, but the way in which this can be a danger to a member is if they're using the Microsoft OneDrive desktop client program, which is bundled with Windows 10, as far as I know. And by the way, Microsoft tries to make the OneDrive the default place to save now, not documents. I believe that happened after Windows 10 came in with more recent versions. So you can find yourself saving to a OneDrive with Windows 10 or 11 because it's there without perhaps realizing what it is. I have to be cautious because you have to do something to register the login to that OneDrive. And if you're staring at your Finder, listen to that, your File Explorer, you see 2 different names. You see OneDrive MelbPC User Group, and you see OneDrive Personal. But you might just think MelbPC User Group is there because it's the email address, I suppose. So the fear there, Gary, is that the member has been inadvertently saving to the personal OneDrive. So no, to the Office 365 OneDrive. That's the problem. The one that we're going to close down, right? They can be saving to the one we're going to close down without realizing they were doing it. That's the problem. But yes, everyone has the absolute right to feel very confused about this.
Harry Kolkata, just wondering, can some formal sessions describing and explaining what we now have and how to use it be
what you now have? Okay, you mean the Google system?
Well, a lot of people are confused as to what we've got, how to use it. Can we please have some formal sessions that people can participate in order to find out what we've got and how to use it? You're confused. You're confusing people tonight. Believe me.
Well, Harry, I might mention the bit where I was really confused was when I was trying to help a member set up an email client that when you started doing it, it would hand over to Google to set up a GWS account, but it fell over when it got to the password and we couldn't work out why. And it was only your input that revealed he had a private Google account as well as a GWS account with the same email address.
Yeah, that's the Google side I was mentioning, Dave. That's right.
That is really twisted.
It's also quite common.
Yeah, well,
Harry?
bent me, I tell you.
Harry?
Yes.
I took my work OneDrive and saved that.
Yes.
Because it was going to be closed down.
Yes.
And I've taken out a subscription.
Yes.
To Office or Microsoft 365. And I've found that I've been saving things to the local drive, which then gets copied up to the personal OneDrive. But some of it seems to be disappearing. And at one stage, it came up and was trying to save something to the work account, but it wouldn't let me log in. Is it possible that it's got itself confused and it's putting my private stuff into the old work account and I can't get to it?
That is technically possible, John, because first off, very briefly, so this can only happen because you've got on your desktop a link to the cloud account. If it's just sitting there in the cloud and you're not using the desktop client, which is just called OneDrive, something.
No, I'm using File Explorer to put these things away.
Yeah. But you'll see in File Explorer two
entries.
If I can, 2 entries. I mean, I don't know if I can. My screen will be it'll be far too small on my screen if I bring it up. But if I just look at it for a moment, see, I'm just seeing 2 entries because I've still got mine on my desktop. One says OneDrive - MelbPC User Group Inc.
Yeah.
And in my case, the other one only says OneDrive, but sometimes in some context, you see OneDrive Personal. Now in Windows, what's here, Colin, is actually quite tricky to understand, even though we're leaving it behind. In other words, that OneDrive MelbPC User Group entry will disappear as soon as your account is deleted, right? In principle, we should have done that already, but because of the archiving process, we're not doing it for everybody at the same time. So in this particular aspect, Colin, no, you can't predict where a member is without knowing exactly what's going on in the background. But all we're trying to do at the moment is to make sure members don't lose any data. What they can and can't do in future is all in the Google system, right?
Harry, can I throw another one in? John Thompson here. A lot of people will have an independent Microsoft account. I've got a couple of them, which I incurred from buying a new PC, a new desktop, and I innocently at the time opened a Microsoft account and I have an Outlook.com email account because of that. Now, I don't use them, but they've given me OneDrive accounts.
Yeah,
so I've also got, quite independently from anything to do with MelbPC, I've also got OneDrive accounts sitting in my Windows Explorer.
Well, yeah, okay. When you will only have, okay, point one, just about any Microsoft account bundles a OneDrive.
Yep.
Just as every Gmail account bundles a Google Drive. The size of the OneDrive depends whether you're paying them or not, crudely. If you're not paying them, it's 5 gigabytes. If you're paying them, it's a terabyte. Okay. The little program that puts stuff on your desktop, the Windows OneDrive program, will allow only one personal OneDrive to be connected, John. So if you're inadvertently saving to a personal OneDrive, it has to be the one that you see in File Explorer. You can have 10. I mean, I've got at least 3 because of historical reasons. I've got the MelbPC one I've renamed, and I think I've got a couple of others, but there's one of them I'm choosing is one I created actually when we were able to create. I was grabbing my own MelbPC username with Outlook.com afterwards, then nobody else used it, and that's the one I use for my personal 1 terabyte OneDrive. I'm paying Microsoft for that. There is a problem. Sorry, very briefly. Now, there's a problem. It's not straightforward to be sure what's going on because you can see the folders in File Explorer without one or both of them actually being currently synchronizing with the cloud, John.
Harry, may I put some clarity on that?
Yeah, please do.
If you open File Explorer and click on Documents or Desktop and look at the properties, that will tell you where your desktop or documents files are going. There's also a little setting under there that says reset to default, which will, if you click on that, it will actually change the location to just a local folder. But if you have a OneDrive for business for the MelbPC running and a OneDrive personal running, you go into File Explorer and click on Desktop, right-click Properties, and that will tell you where your files will go by default. Now that didn't add any clarity at all, did it?
Yeah, that's no problem. It's only a matter of realizing that you've got the accounts and people
Yes.
getting the panic about it.
No, I think they really are. This is more fun than I expected, actually, Philip. I thought everyone here would find this boringly familiar. There really are 2 issues, aren't there? What your default place for saving is, and this depends partly on the application, I think. You can set Word to save in one place and Excel to save in another if you want to. Now, I thought, Philip, that if you were not careful and didn't change anything, recent versions of Windows would place documents inside the OneDrive.
Only if you do it with your eyes closed, Harry. When you set up OneDrive, or when you're configuring a new Windows installation, you need to configure OneDrive which means putting your username and password.
Yeah.
And then there are a whole lot of next buttons. And the second next button is where do you want to back up? And you can actually get to that anyway, just after it's all set up, by going into settings and backup. And there are three entries there: desktop, documents, and I can't think of the third.
Pictures.
So pictures, that's correct, yes. And if there's a green tick there, that means it's the default location is OneDrive. If there's not, it'll say, well, there'll be an entry there saying, do you want to back it up? It doesn't quite say that, it just says backup, I think. And if you assert that, the default location will then change to OneDrive. So when it's being set up, if you do it with your eyes closed, it will set it up to put your documents, desktop, and in pictures into OneDrive.
Harry, can I do a screen share for a minute? John Thompson here.
Go ahead.
Just hold on a tick. I think that'll do it. Can everybody see my, that's a Windows 11 settings page. So if you go into System and click on Storage, and then go down to Storage Management, where new content is saved. Now this is quite critical if everybody wants to avoid storing stuff in OneDrive. You click on that and you get change where your apps, documents, music, pictures, etc. are saved by default. Now I've left new apps will be saved to my C drive, okay? And everything else, new documents, music, photos, videos, movies, everything else into D drive. And you get to that just by clicking on that and then clicking on D. Or in my case, I could put it on a backup hard drive, separate hard drive. Now, that's one of the wonderful things about Windows 11, that this sort of thing is a lot easier than it is in Windows 10. So that's anybody who's got Windows 11, that's what they want to do to start off with, where new content is saved, and choose a second drive and not the OneDrive. I've got OneDrive turned off, so that's why it doesn't appear on any of those.
I think you and Philip are talking about a different setting. In a way, this is academic in terms of our historic OneDrive with Office 365, because the main aim for members here is to get stuff out of it that they want if they haven't done it already, right?
Yeah, but it's complementary. You've still got to do both of them.
My folder backup says that my desktop is being synced with my personal OneDrive, but all the drives in the Windows setting for storage are local, right? And I take that to mean, because from Windows's point of view, the desktop is local, but it's being synchronized with the cloud as well. Because that's
it's all local. It's all local. It just, some stuff is well, if it's synchronized to OneDrive and you can optionally say it's a file on demand, so that once it's synchronized, you haven't got a copy on your local machine. There's a directory entry there.
Philip, my personal OneDrive does not include a desktop folder. Okay.
Yes, well, you're mad if you do.
But according to the settings that you mentioned, my desktop is being synchronized with the cloud.
then your well, it's Harry will look at this, but I'm 92.5% certain that the way I've described it is the way it works.
But the guy
and the best way to do it is set up another machine and see if you get a desktop that looks like your current one.
the guy who raised this and said we need a session on it is dead right.
Well, in a way, no, because this is vanishing, right? There's one of the reasons we haven't tried to make things uniform here is because exactly the way a member approaches dealing with their legacy Microsoft OneDrive depends on a lot of variables. One of them has been mentioned, and it's an obvious one. If you're paying Microsoft for 1 terabyte, you've plenty of room for anything you've got in the MelbPC one. And there's a quite nice tool if you've got a lot of data called mover.io that will do the job. Moving things to the Google Drive creates 2 problems. 1, mover.io won't do it, and 2, you haven't got nearly as much room. So we would take those 2 members in a very different direction if we were asked for help, okay? But what's just been discussed is independent of our relationship with the Microsoft OneDrive, because it's about how the Microsoft OneDrive thing, wherever you're getting it from, relates to what's only on your computer inside your hard drive, brackets S, okay? So Philip and I have something to look at. I believe I'm going to take Microsoft by backup, meaning that's exactly what it's doing. It's doing a backup, regardless of the fact that it's not synchronizing in the normal sense that that folder is part of the OneDrive that shows on my desktop. But I think we better leave that one there till we sorted it out. But yes, there is a Windows settings for where its concept of new content is stored. And with one exception, as it happens, everything on my list is going into my drive C. The exception, for goodness knows why, is going into my drive D. It's offline maps.
Can I make some comments there? I had problems with a friend this afternoon losing where her pictures and documents were going. And when I investigated her machine, I found that she'd got a new Windows 7, Windows 11 machine, and the setup of the account, when she logged in to the Microsoft account, it moved the documents and pictures folders in under the OneDrive directory.
Right.
By default. And she had very large directories for pictures and documents, far bigger than the capacity of the Microsoft OneDrive. And with much fiddling around, I finally found there is a way of clicking on the OneDrive settings and turning off that synchronization. Then the documents and pictures will then default back under the local user account.
Mm-hmm.
But until you do that, you go into File Explorer, you click on pictures thinking it's local. No, it's this pictures folder that they've set up under OneDrive. So you've got to make sure you turn off that synchronization to go back to your local folders.
I can confirm that, Harry, that I've got a brand new Windows 11 laptop, and it set everything to go directly to OneDrive based on my login. As it was my own personal laptop, of course, I signed in using my Microsoft account. Fortunately, I do have a Microsoft 365 account. So I wasn't bothered by the space, but when I actually went to find those things on my local drive, it was synchronizing with the cloud where I hadn't previously wanted to do that. So the way that I got out of that, the largest number of files I've got are photos. So I actually created a separate folder called photos rather than pictures, and that was allowed to stay on my PC without being synced to.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Coming back to Richard Bradford for a moment, I think if you want something not to get into the OneDrive, you better jolly well get it out of the OneDrive client folder.
That's right, yeah.
Because it's only, you can disconnect it. And this is the complication I mentioned earlier. This is genuinely confusing because I had this happen to me the other day, that one of my 2 OneDrives was syncing and the other one wasn't. And I had to, I think there are 2 ways of telling. I won't go into it here. If anyone wants to know, give me an email unless you, but I believe I know now what, there are 2 signs of it. One has to do with the icons that show in the system tray. You lose an icon if it's not syncing, I think. If it's not active, so if the program isn't active, you can have the folder there on your desktop without the OneDrive program actually running. And the OneDrive program's job is to do what you've set it to do in the syncing settings, which is what John was just talking about, I think. But you can't effectively use your local OneDrive as a merely local store.
No.
As long as that program is running, and there's no point in having it if it's not. You might as well call it useless OneDrive, John, or something like that, to make sure you understand it's nothing to do with the cloud.
What concerned me about this was I have a separate private personal account, what was once called the live account. So John Hall at live something.
All right. Yes.
If I used my own, if I used my MelbPC as my main account, and I set up a brand new laptop from scratch.
Yes.
That John Hall at melbpc.org.au data would be going to Microsoft OneDrive. It would not be going to my Google Drive. And so I do agree with Colin that we probably have to have an education session of some sort to say, well, if we want to keep stuff in Google Drive, we need to stop it automatically going to the Microsoft OneDrive.
Yeah, just to one point in passing, and Philip will correct me if I'm wrong, when you've got a new Windows computer, it needs a Microsoft account.
Yes, it does.
As its kind of defining account. And this is just catching up with Apple, which has been at it for years, actually. I think Microsoft is imitating Apple almost, but it's also part of the more proprietary approach that goes with the App Store, for example. It's getting harder to bring external apps in. It's it's not impossible with the Mac, as I was doing it the other day, but you just need to know what to do. But Apple is, we know this in extreme form on our phones, of course. It's much harder to introduce something that isn't going through Google Play or the App Store in Apple on an iPhone, okay? But you can't use a business account to be the primary account on a personal Windows computer.
Oh, good. Okay. All right.
Won't let you do it.
Okay, good.
Harry, Cedric has his hand up.
Cedric, go.
Yeah, all right. I was a couple of things harking back quite a long way in this conversation. You said you can either have the business account, the Microsoft Club business account, or a personal Office 365 account. The third option is that you can have, rather than just having 5 gig of storage without having a OneDrive, you can. There's also Microsoft have an option that you can buy 100 gig of storage rather than the terabyte. It's only 100 gig, and that does not come with all the other bells and whistles that are in Office 365. That's basically what I'm using at present. The other thing I was going to mention is that I'm not quite sure what's going on, but in my desktop, once I had got everything out of the old 1 terabyte OneDrive Club OneDrive Business MelbPC, in Windows Explorer, I then just deleted that folder so that there's no confusion. I'm not going to drag anything into it in future by mistake. I've tried doing the same thing on my laptop. Every time I shut down Windows Explorer and then reopen, it brings back that folder. Fortunately, of course, it's all empty, but it's sitting and annoying me in File Explorer. The OneDrive MelbPC folder is sitting there in Windows Explorer. Quite why my laptop and desktop are behaving in the opposite way with that, I'm not quite sure.
What's one of the things that's in the background there? I think that we've not, what we couldn't do yet, Cedric, is to switch off OneDrive across the board in our system, right? Because we're still archiving from it. Now, as soon as that's happened, we're actually in a position to delete the end user accounts anyway. In the case of email, members already have experience of this because you can switch off Microsoft Exchange in the system, and we've done that. So that when people try and attach an email program, it just fails because it can't connect, because that Microsoft account doesn't allow email. Now, I think there's not such an obvious switch, but it is possible to disable OneDrive across the board. In our case, there's really no point, Cedric, because at the point when you've finished with your OneDrive, the thing to do is to delete your account. You will not then see it. And if you like, we can experiment with you if you're ready, because the only thing that is holding any member to that is because either they haven't archived the data away, or we haven't archived it for them, just in case they need it, right? Do you follow me?
Yeah, no, it's not a big issue for me. It's just that there's, as long as you've got a folder sitting in Windows in File Explorer, there's a small danger that you'll drag something into it by mistake. But
you may well be right. It may well be the situation I was discussing with John Hall.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one. Namely, that from Windows's point of view, that's just another folder. That's my understanding, subject to being corrected by much more knowledgeable people. What makes it active is the OneDrive program that's running to synchronize it.
Yeah.
You can, of course, just stop it doing that, right? But if there's nothing to synchronize it with, I think it can still sit there. It's just Windows doesn't know that, as it were. So you can put files, you can put things into it, but they just sit there on your desktop grinning at you and saying, I'm not going anywhere.
Well, there's also nothing magical about the location of the OneDrive. You can put it anywhere you like.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You mean so, the Windows folder? Yeah.
Yes, that can be anywhere. That can be root of C, root of D, as long as it's a permanently connected drive.
Yeah, because you get into the app and then tell it where it is if you need to, don't you? Yeah.
Yes, but the reason it defaults to users' username OneDrive is, of course, they can have multiple people, multiple accounts on one device,
right?
All with separate locations. And if you actually put it, so let's say D OneDrive or D Stormy, if someone else logs in, it won't be syncing there, but they'll still have access to it.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Windows, they seem to use the library function to redirect the pictures and documents pointers to different locations. That's why they seem to be able to easily switch pictures and documents to be pointing to directories under OneDrive rather than directories under the local account.
Now, I almost think it's the other way around, isn't it? That you can actually add any directory you like to the library. But I'll defer because I rarely use the libraries.
The trouble is the libraries show up under File Explorer.
You can turn it off.
When you're thinking you're looking at a pictures folder in one location, this library function is actually pointed at somewhere else there.
Yes, you can remove a lot of the stuff from the under the isn't it called the quick access? You can remove a lot of stuff from that quick access area. I had to do it for someone earlier this year. It was confusing him completely, so we turned it off. But how I did it, I think I closed my eyes and just hoped for the best, and it worked. That's not something I do readily, because I'm afraid I'm a person who uses a command shell more than I use anything else.
Yeah. Briefly back to what Cedric says, what he's talking about, if anyone here is interested, is what Microsoft are calling OneDrive standalone, which is $30 a year Australian at the moment. So I'm not aware of any other member. We're looking at the target is pretty small there, Cedric, actually. It's members using significantly more than they can get into their Google Drive, which is 30 in all, and under 100 gigabytes, right? So then perhaps half a dozen members max in that particular bracket. But yes, that's a genuine option if they want to pay that. What I can't quite get on my, I think I've got to look at Google One, haven't I? I think Google's pricing is quite good for increasing the size of your drive.
I think the pricing's fairly similar for Google and Microsoft. Somewhere I've got a table comparing them to. Don't think I'm going to be able to find where I've got that little tabulation to quickly pull it up.
It's about $2.50. I think it's about $2.50 for Google Drive for 100 gigs.
$2.50 US.
No, I don't think it was. I think it was Australian.
Yeah, that's a month.
I saw when I looked at it, the Microsoft prices were Australian dollars and the Google prices were US dollars, unless something's changed in the very near in the last month or two.
Cedric, it's on my scheme now. Google One plan, personal, by the way. You've got to say personal because we don't have this option now with Google Workspace anyway. We did before, but it was a different pricing structure anyway. So Google One plan that's right for you, it's telling me basic 100 gigabytes, Australian $2.49 a month.
All right. That's a change since I looked at it.
Standard is 200 gig, that's $4.39 Australian a month.
Could I just say something about the Google accounts versus the Microsoft accounts?
Please do.
One of the main consumers of data space on my Microsoft account was photos. Now with Google, if you use Google Pictures, now there's a difference here. If you are a professional photographer and you're uploading very large photos, Google will start charging you for them. But in my experience, and I don't know if it is I've just been lucky, but I have got virtually all of what the photos that I had on Microsoft, I've got those now on Google, and they are not charging me anything for them. They're not taking up any of my Google Drive space, and you know, so for me, and certainly for the old person that Bert Lesich was helping, Google is a much better bet for photos and pictures or whatever than the Microsoft in that respect.
Oh, John,
have you read the small print? Have you read the small print yet? Because I think
Yes,
you'll find that
Google have got
I know it
access to
can
your
change at
photos
some
and
time.
they
I
have
know.
got permission to use them if you go that way.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Can we just be clear about this one? Google Photos got a lot of us hooked when they were giving space away for free.
Yeah.
Provided they were what they called high definition and not bigger. And
Yes.
I believe there's something Hugh said once, I think it might even have been 13 megabytes or not more. Exactly what the criterion was, that isn't the point. There was always a threshold above which you had to start paying.
Yeah.
But I thought it was something like June 2021 when they pulled the plug on that arrangement, but they grandfathered what you'd already grabbed. So if you'd managed to go, let's say, to 100 gigabytes, when it was free, they let you keep it.
Okay, that's maybe what's happened to me then.
But from then on, every extra megabyte was going to be charged, provided you were above. It's almost as if they segregated that 100 gigabytes, let's say, John. Then you look again at, in your case, the 15 gig, which is the standard before you start paying. As soon as you're coming over the 15 gig with photos, you're paying. Exactly what the charging model is, I don't know. Whether it fits into the planning I'm looking at now. Does anyone here know how they charge, by the way, for marginal photos now?
No.
Okay. But I'd be, look.
Yeah, I can.
Oh, it's you, that brilliant.
I can tell you, Harry.
Good.
Yeah, they charge according to the plans that you're looking at. So
okay,
photos above that just go out of your normal Google Drive quota.
They just bounce you up to the next level.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's not incremental. It's just it's all right. Which figures? I can't imagine they would be doing it incrementally. It'd be far too difficult to charge and so on, wouldn't it? Thanks.
But again, the point is that with our MelbPC accounts, we get double the amount of storage. Rather than 15, we get 30. So
yes, we do. But you know, there's a catch there, John.
Yeah.
With Microsoft, we had a 1 terabyte OneDrive and 50 gigabytes independently of email storage.
All right. Yeah.
Google, at least in my limited knowledge, has always bundled your email into the single drive.
Yeah. Okay.
My wife and I were continually being told we hadn't got room in our Google Drive because it was all email. Some of which would be attachments with photos, of course, but you know, this is a familiar problem. Apple users have it even worse because with the free allowance, however much you pay for that Mac, you're getting 5 gigabytes of cloud store. And if there's any system in which you're going to go taking pictures, it's the Apple one, isn't it? Because there are more iPhones around than anything else. And unless you're careful, it's all being saved to the iCloud. Against that, they're quite cheap at 50 gig. You know, it's quite a good rate. It's under $2, I think, per annum for the 50 gig stage. But the wonders of the cloud are that you can share that data across your devices. You take it on your iPhone, you can view it on your iPad and all that, but it's at a price because it's very, very easy to fill that 5 gigabytes. At least with Google, because we've got the 30, you get 15. And if you're not using the email much, you've got plenty of space. But it's very hard indeed. If you're a professional photographer, John, you're taking raw pictures at 30 and 40 megabytes, aren't you? I mean, we're talking serious data there, aren't we?
Yeah. As I say, maybe I'm lucky, but as far as I can see, my pictures do not count.
No, well,
if
it fits with my understanding, and as Hugh's in the room, as it were, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was because you were grandfathered with what you got before they pulled the shutter down, right? And so they're not counting what was already in your photos against your, in this case, well, it's 15 or 30 gig, whichever account you're looking at, John. Yeah, okay. But the whole area, coming back somewhere like where Colin was, I think, the whole business of understanding the way we work with cloud storage is pretty hairy in my view, especially because typically in supporting members and other people I have dealings with, like family members who are Apple users, you're jumping between 3 systems with different rules, mostly Google, Microsoft, and Apple. And you have to be very careful not to generalize them. For example, and here's an easy example of this, is the way that deletion works. You know the business with Apple. So if you use iCloud Photos on your iPad or your iPhone, what's stored locally is thumbnails, right? So it's very economical of space, but the full-sized images are there in the cloud using up your 5 gig or whatever it is. If you delete the thumbnail, it deletes everywhere. Now, Google Photos has a facility to delete locally and leave it in the cloud. So you in a way, Microsoft isn't quite as much a player here because Google is fighting Apple in the photos world in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Microsoft as such, I mean, and so that there are other issues around, I won't get into them, but mostly the interest here is between Apple and Google rather than Microsoft and either of them. Because if you look, one thing is if you're using I'm trying to, in my family, store photos in Microsoft OneDrives at 1 terabyte with our family account. But you don't have online, you don't automatically have good editing tools. Google has put its editing tools in the cloud for what that's worth, the best ones it's got. Apple puts its best editing tools on its desktop. As far as I know, you don't get really good tools in the cloud because they came from different places. So that's another way in which, on the occasions I've got into this, it's because of people storing huge amounts of photos in Apple and having trouble with storage. And it's all too easy to say, put it in a Microsoft 1 terabyte drive or 100 gig because they've still got to edit them somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the services to our members and what we offer to our members, and the Colin Carter's right. We probably do need to think about educating our members about photo storage and so on and so forth. I'm sure that's probably a major part of most members' lives, that they want something archived for posterity. And if your account is going to die along with you, how is anybody else going to be able to see the photos after you've gone?
I think that's a very good one, John, because all the substantial forms of, well, all the cloud stores depend on the life of the account, whose store it is, for starters. And as soon as you and I die, if we're not very careful, that account becomes inaccessible. Because it's much harder to deal with digital legacies in what we think of as a natural way than it is to deal with physical legacies, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to be extremely careful. So the obvious answer is make sure you're backing it up somewhere else that isn't in the cloud, unfortunately.
I think it's something that the committee could consider, is whether we offer some sort of storage service for our members in perpetuity, as long as, you know, as long as we've got the funds.
I think, well, looking at Rob saying, I'm not going to say any more at the moment. If we'll do that
what I have done, I subscribe to the Eastman online genealogical newsletter, and a few times he has talked about, he's had articles, he sends out a few articles a day, sort of thing, an enormous quantity of stuff. And I've seen a number of discussions he's had about that, what happens, how does your digital stuff get passed on to somebody else?
Yes.
And I've followed one of his recommendations. Put a letter with your will. Here's my master password.
Yeah.
That came up with the wonderful woman we had a few weeks ago, months
Yeah.
ago, isn't it? Who I think David Stoney Gibson found. You can put, they're not technically codicils because that's a legal instrument, but there are things you can put with your will to deal with aspects of your legacy with a small l that aren't typically under the control of your will. And we didn't quite get in that meeting, I think, what I think would still be valuable to surviving members of MelbPC, although we want lots of new young ones as well, as Hugh said, which is managing the digital legacy, because it is quite a challenge. And the big bullies of the internet world don't make life very easy for you if you don't get it right. Increasingly, that's going to get worse because of the amount of identity theft. They're putting more and more shutters, closing more and more shutters, making life harder and harder for the rest of us because too many nasty people are stealing identities.
In the discussions we've had tonight, there's a number of good topics for presentations for the meeting that could tackle those subjects, but start at the beginning.
That's always assuming somebody's got the answer, Barry.
Good point.
Well, we're dealing with a level now that people are using the cloud storage, and there's the problems of transition and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But there's others who aren't using it and are just not familiar at all. That's why I say a presentation that starts right back at the beginning would be valuable, both about cloud storage and about the digital legacy as well. It'd be separate subjects.
Oh, I agree. They're separate. They overlap in an obvious way, but they're still separate, conceptually separate subjects. I mean, if you're talking about the difference here between Apple, Google, and Microsoft is a technical difference that can affect functionality depending where you sit when you start, Barry.
Yeah.
The laws around digital legacy will almost always be national.
Yes.
You've got this is part of the problem, actually, isn't it? What you've got is the international behemoths, the three of them will do for starters, who are running essentially the same show across national boundaries and often with storages in different jurisdictions. Whereas the law about inheritance in Australia, I think, is state-based, isn't it? In other words, you get down to a comparatively micro level, and it creates all kinds of issues when you try and put these two together.
But we are the MelbPC user group, so we can be a bit parochial.
Well, yeah. I also suspect, going back to what Barry said, that there are going to be members who will know the answers. They may or may not be in this room now, or at least give us the resources. In terms of the cloud storage thing we can manage, Barry, okay. But when you get to the digital legacy, we're in very deep water, I think. But there are members who...
Harry, there's also, what you say, there's people who know the answers.
Yeah.
But there's also people who don't know the questions.
I like that, because I was going to say earlier, partly responding to Colin's concern, the first thing to be clear about is what the questions are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I do believe different members will have different questions, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't tackle them. But we want to know what they are. That's right.
This
No,
borders onto the whole topic of synchronization and networking and devices communicating with each other, especially devices of different operating systems. And it's a big, big subject.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so we're technically out of time. This is bed socks time, guys.
Yeah.
But, or late night scotches or whatever you do. But so much happens in this kind of discussion that you can see this branching in many directions. Right.
I do think it's an important topic for the members that we have with us at the moment, who are obviously paying their subscriptions for a service of some sort.
Yes.
Obviously, they're getting the help.
Yeah.
And if you look at the demographics, obviously, there's a few of us that are starting to think about legacy. So
very nice.
I do think it's something that we could look at as future subjects, and maybe even whether there's any way we could offer some sort of service to the members.
I think the idea of developing resources that in some sense have been validated, they wouldn't be ours, John.
No.
We're not a law firm, do you follow me? But we ought to be a kind of choice for members seeking what to do.
Yeah.
With a few links on the website, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just say the summary of that? Rather than offering a service, we should be offering a bit of education.
Okay, yeah, that's a good start.
Yeah. Right.
I think both.
While you're taking a breather, it's now 9:15, so we'll continue the discussion if you like. But I just have a comment on that, that some of what you've talked about tonight is over my head, and you're talking a lot in depth. I wonder how many members would like a basic explanation of what you've been talking about, of iCloud storage and what you can do.
Exactly.
And as Cedric said, maybe it's just a bit of education for the members. It may not suit some of you being basics, but there may be a lot of members that don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, we'll close the meeting officially. The recording will stop. Our next meeting's on Wednesday, the 7th of December. Remember, we don't have a meeting in January. We can have a month off, and we'll see you all in December.